Good morning, audience. It is indeed a pleasure to have a stalwart like Dr. Ram Sevak Sharma ji with us today under the podcast series called as Stalwart Speak through IAPM. Dear friends, all of us know that COVID seems to be much more under control in India with an impressive statistics of more than 10 million COVID-19 vaccines given twice or thrice in last 11 days and with almost 716 million vaccinated till now. Indeed, successful vaccination drive has helped India to bounce back rapidly. And all of us know that the captain of this successful vaccination drive is none other than Dr. Ram Sevak Sharma ji. Let's welcome Dr. R.S. Sharma, who's IAP's esteemed guest for its podcast series called as Stalwart Speak. Dr. Sharma needs no introduction. He is a very senior member of Indian Administrative Services, 1978 batch, and he's currently working as Chief Executive Officer, CEO of the National Health Authority under the Ministry of Health and Family Welfare. Sir is also serving as chairman of IMPART Group on vaccine administration for COVID-19. Apart from this very successful vaccination drive, sir, we know that another feather in your cap has been Aadhaar, the largest digital identity platform in the world, where you were one of the founding DGs. It's indeed a pleasure, sir. We welcome you again, sir. Sir, my first question to you. We are all aware you have 43 years of career. In fact, very distinguished 43 years in government. Sir, where you have led many impressive reforms, you have leveraged IT to simplify draconian administrative processes. Sir, but every time I meet you, even today, and talk to you, you come across as a very simple and grounded person. Sir, can you please tell our audience about your background, about your struggles, about your professional journey of being a civil servant? How did it all start and what challenges you had to overcome? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Dr. Charu Malhotra, for having me on this podcast. I've always, been very, very happy participating in all the programs of IIPA, and especially under the leadership of Dr. Tripathi, Mr. S.N. Tripathi. It has been a wonderful thing because he has given a new he has provided new heights to the IIPA by inviting all people from all walks of life to basically share the knowledge. And I think IIPA is today one of the premier institutions in our country to basically talk about administrative reforms and administrative systems. So I think it's always a pleasure to get associated with IIPA. With regard to your question about my background and how did I start, so I don't want to bore your audience with the minor details. Nevertheless, I would like to just share with them that I was born in a very small village in western UP, and my village did not even have a primary school. So we used to go about 2 kilometers with our patti and bori and those things in the early childhood. And we had the primary education, then of course the middle education as it was called in UP, which is 6 to 8 class. And then of course I studied in a small town called Firozabad. And ours is a farming family, and I still have a lot of interest in farming and horticulture. So there, I think we studied in a primary school. Our primary school did not have a building. It was just a big banyan tree under which we used to just sort of study. And whenever there was a rainfall and the banyan tree could not take the rainfall, we will all march down to a nearby village in somebody's veranda to sort of save ourselves from rain. So it was an absolutely sort of rural background I have, and that actually has in a way been my advantage rather than being a disadvantage, because typically people talk about these kinds of things as being a disadvantage. I feel that because of that background, I think I am able to relate to the rural psyche. I am able to relate to the way rural people, their behavior or their kind of reactions to various things. And that has actually helped me in remaining connected with the people. in a way. Though, of course, I'm not a political leader, but as an administrative leader, also, I think you require to get, if you really want to be connected with them and you really want to ensure that the reforms which you do or the work which you do really benefits them and affects them, then you should be able to think like them. So that's one part. Thereafter, of course, I went to University of Allahabad and then, of course, IIT Kanpur, and I wanted to be a mathematician. I was very good in mathematics, and therefore I thought I'll become a mathematics person. Therefore, I got some admissions in some American universities for doing my PhD in mathematics. But then, my family did not want me to go to America. As I said, my family is a rural family, farmer's family. My uncle did not, he was a farmer. He did not want me to go outside because he was afraid that if I go out, I'll get married to some white lady and stuff like that, the usual stuff. So I was not allowed to go, and then I decided that if I stay here only, I join a government service. And this one was the service, the Indian Administrative Service. So I was lucky to have got into the first chance, and at the age of 22, I got into the service, and therefore I've completed 43 years now in the service. So that has been my journey. But my initial background is basically rural, and that is why I think it's a great advantage. You will not believe that when I joined University of Allahabad, I could not talk in Hindi, because I was speaking my local dialect called Braj Bhasha. So we were talking in that, and it was I got a very more than adequate dose of ragging in the hostel. People thought that I am a very strange creature who cannot speak in Hindi. So that is how I began my journey with. But I think it has been a fascinating journey in this life, and I wish if I'm born again, I would still like to repeat the same life.
This is so inspiring, sir. This really puts all the dots in my mind very well. Every time we've talked to you, we feel that you feel the pulse of common person. Second, sir, it is indeed very interesting for my audience also that language is never a barrier to success. The fact that you could even speak Hindi and today you are there in all the international platforms also with ease proves that if you have that in you, you could always make it. It's about hard work, it's about values, like you said, rural connect, grounded. So we really appreciate. Sir, sir, you did your master's in computer applications from University of California. Then when did that happen?
See, it's very interesting again because after joining the Indian Administrative Service in 1978, I got Bihar as my cadre. You in the IAS, you get cadres allotted, so I got Bihar cadre. And in Bihar, I was posted in various places in districts and thereafter in secretariat. So my first district was a district called Begusarai, and there I got posted in January of 1985. And there it was that I got my first computer. So in that time, it was called, it was not a PC or anything like that. It was called a machine called DCM Tandy machine. It did not have a hard drive. It just had floppy and a big floppy and stuff like that. So we did some experiments. So what happened was that since the very beginning, I got introduced to this system, and because I was a student of mathematics. So I had a lot of interest in programming because programming is nothing but logic and mathematics. So that way I got interested in programming, and programming became my hobby. And that being the case, I realized that there are information and communication systems. They can actually simplify a lot of processes. So that we started our journey with basically feeding the data of the lost and found guns, and then finding out some pairs. I have written about that in my book, which I had published last year in September. So basically, what happened is that since the very beginning, I got interested in computers and their applications. So thereafter, I kind of wrote a program for treasuries, these state treasuries. Then I wrote a program on public grievances. Then, at that time, you had NREGA, the National Rural Employment Guarantees Program, which is called MNREGA today. That also, it was called NREP in those times, National Rural Employment Program. So we wrote programs to do that. I got transferred to a place called Purnia. Purnia had a lot of agrarian issues, so we wrote program. We basically distributed a lot of stealing land. So that also we kind of expedited the cases using computers. So I have been using computers for a long time. And when I got posted as transport commissioner, the Bihar was the first state in the whole country where we started collecting tax across the counter. I mean, online thing has happened much later, but in 1992 we started collecting tax on the counter for the vehicles. Otherwise, it was a very complicated process where you will have to find the demand, then you go to treasury, then you get a challan, and then you deposit the money in the bank, then you go back to treasury, and then you present that challan to the district transport office who issued the tax token. So it was a very bad, very long process. We introduced a process where a person can come directly to the counter. The counter person will just plug in his vehicle number. He will tell him the tax demand, and then after that, the person can pay tax in cash or can pay tax in bank draft or check or whatever. And then immediately he is given a tax token. So that was a big revolution in those times. Now, thereafter, I came to Government of India. I wrote some program called File Tracker, which essentially was a program to track the letters and files of the government. And the then finance minister and finance secretary, they all were very happy with the program, and it worked for some time in the Department of Economic Affairs and Ministry of Finance. But you know what? At that point in time, I realized that I have been doing this programming business and the computer business as a hobby. Now I have the mathematics background, but then I don't have a formal kind of degree in the computer science and in the programming in some sense. So people were just respectful to me, and therefore they were sort of agreeing with whatever I was trying to tell them. But I thought that maybe they were just deferring to my seniority and my service. And basically, I did not have any formal, rigorous training in the computer science. So at the age of 45, I decided to write GRE and TOEFL and all that stuff. And I applied for admission because in those times, the government of India was funding the study at the Kennedy School, in the Colombo Plan and all that. But there was no program for, studying computer science. They were funding for, public administration and stuff like that. So computer science was not a main degree. So therefore, I was not entitled to those kinds of programs. So I thought, let me independently write the GRE and TOEFL, and on my own strength, let me try to get admission. And interestingly, I got admissions in a couple of universities in the US. One of them, of course, also gave me scholarship. So that University of California, Riverside campus, I got admission, and I was joint secretary, dealing with the World Bank here in the Department of Economic Affairs at that time in the year 2000. So then, in the year 2000, I just, with all my family members, traveled to US to complete my masters, and I completed my masters in 2002. And that, interestingly, would be very useful when I joined the UIDAI to do Aadhaar project, because I had all the technology facets were all very much clear to me.
I'm really, sir, so impressed. 1992 programs. I'm sure, sir, you must have used Hollerith cards also then, because that was the time when programming was happening through punch cards, etc. And then third generation computers were there. So, and then I'm really envious of you. You seem to be father of e-office of now. You seem to be father of CP Grams of now. And all this is very holistic in your personality. So, little before Aadhaar, I take you to the time when we had first, interacted. You were secretary that time called as DIT, Department of IT, sir. So, during that tenure, sir, what were the key initiatives that you think were very important and have set the precedence for now, whatever India is heading towards, thankfully?
So let me just make a minor correction to what you said.
Yes,
The Secretary of DIT happened after Aadhaar. I joined Aadhaar in the year 2009, July, and Mr. Nandan Nilekani was my chairman. I was the DG and mission director, and we started together in July of 2009. I left it in March of 2013 after 4 years approximately, and I went as chief secretary in Jharkhand. So there I worked for about a year, 13 months. And I came back and joined the Department of Electronics and IT, which is called DITI at that time, and now, of course, MITI, and nowadays Ministry of Electronics and IT. So that I joined in the year on 1st of May 2014. And the new government under the Honorable Prime Minister Modi took charge on 26th of May 2014. So more or less, I also came around the same time. And then the Honorable Prime Minister asked us that, we want to do Digital India program. So I was lucky to have been a part of that journey. And therefore, from the department side, we articulated all the, deliverables and facets of Digital India program, which actually seeks to make India, transform India into a digitally empowered society and knowledge economy. So we started that program sometimes in the May, June, July of 2014. And in fact, the Union Cabinet gave the approval to that program, if I remember correctly, on 20th of August 2014. So this was the journey which we started. And of course, in that program, I was lucky because of my Aadhaar experience. We built a number of digital, artifacts, and some of these were basically the electronic KYC. Then we built e-sign, and then we built the digital locker, and many other things like for the pension also we built digital life certificate called Jeevan Praman, and so these were many of the innovations which we did under the Digital India program of the Honorable Prime Minister. And 7 of these artifacts were actually launched by the Honorable Prime Minister on 1st of July 2015, the day Digital India Week was celebrated. And the 6th anniversary of that was done this month in July of 2021. So that is where this whole journey started, and I am lucky and fortunate to be a part of that journey. And our Prime Minister has been the real driving force of that journey, because I think he is the one person who understands completely the technology and its various facets and how that technology can be delivered. Uh, Technology can simplify people's life, can simplify the processes, and can help the people. And now you can see the various facets of it. Direct benefit transfer. Imagine in COVID times, we were able to transfer money to 500 million, families, 500 million people of this country. LPG, direct benefit transfer is taking place. So DBT is taking place in billions and billions of numbers. The digital identity, we have done 57 billion authentications. All kinds of services are being delivered through digital identity. I think India has typically really leapfrogged under the Digital India program of our Prime Minister.
I totally agree with you, sir. It is the political leadership of our country which has steered all of us to ensure that technology reaches the grassroots. Sir, in the same vein, as a continuation, for technology to reach to the grassroots, all the initiatives which you mentioned are very relevant, DigiLocker, ePraman, eSign, etc. Sir, but you yourself once said that the telecom and broadcasting services must reach to all pockets of our country, sir. As chairman of TRAI, Telecom Regulatory Authority of India, sir, there were several initiatives which have always tantalized me about your leadership. There was one, program on blockchain. There was to achieve regulatory outcomes. I remember your one interview where you mentioned. You've also talked about net neutrality with a lot of passion. Sir, can you explain to our audience a little bit about both these concepts?
Actually, I was again very lucky to have been, made the chairman of the Telecom Regulatory Authority of India in August of 2015, and just a little before my superannuation, which would have happened on 30th of August 2015. So I had the distinction of serving 2 tenures there for a full 5 years plus period in TRAI. And there were a number of things, and one of my overarching objective in TRAI had been that ultimately there are telecom operators. Obviously, they are very influential people. They have the voice. They can articulate their concerns and their problems, certainly. So, and there is a regulator. There is a Department of Telecom. So everyone is represented in some sense through a very strong voice. It is a consumer who is not really does not have a voice, and telecommunication is in an area where you have 1 billion consumers of the telecom services. So therefore, I think my overarching priority was that I must become the voice of the consumers. I must ensure that their interests are protected. Of course, the other objectives of having a healthy competition, having other kinds of the quality of service, etc. They are very important, but consumer must get a fair deal of the money, fair deal out of the money which he pays to these service providers. That I think was my overarching criteria. So that's one part. And all our steps we are taken keeping the consumer's interest in mind. Of course, the interest of service providers. I also believe that many times people think that service providers' interests are a divergence from the from the consumer interest, which is not true. If you provide, there is no dichotomy between provision of a quality service and the interest of the service providers, because ultimately service providers will also flourish only when they provide consumer services. Then and only then consumers will happily pay them the money. So ultimately, it's a virtuous cycle. It's not really a vicious cycle. So that way, I think it's very important to understand that the consumers' interests are not necessarily opposite to the interest of the service providers. That's one part. Then on the first question on blockchain, the whole idea was that there is a problem relating to the spam calls. People are getting SMSs, people are getting calls in the middle of the meeting. One gets a call saying that, oh, you want loan for household goods, or you want insurance products, or you want some other, issues, your RO services you want. Various kinds of, things happen. And you basically get these calls from the normal, genuine 10-digit numbers. So you feel some of your friend may be calling and you may not have saved his number, and therefore you pick up the phone. Then so these people are calling from their personal numbers. This is a bad idea, because advertisement numbers. There is a series called 1410141, which is actually meant for advertisement calls. Now people don't use it. People just give their number saying that I request Charu Malhotra ji that you make 100 calls and I'll give you 500 rupees. That's how it happens. And Charu Malhotra ji sets down her own telephone and starts making calls to the 100 persons whom that telemarketer provides. So this is how it is happening. This is a bad thing. So especially when people subscribe to what is called do not disturb services, then they should not get the calls, but still you get the calls. So there should be a process that if somebody is calling despite DND and somebody is making a spam call, we should immediately disconnect him. We should immediately sort of stop his services and then investigate and find out that if that she or he is making commercial calls, then we should stop him or her from doing that from a normal number. So for that, what the process earlier was essentially very complicated. That if I am an Airtel customer and some Vodafone Idea customer calls me, then I will complain to my Airtel fellow, who in turn will find out as to which telecom company the caller belongs, and that they will inform him and stuff like that. So it used to take about a week. And today, what is happening is that in a week's time, the fellow would have spammed 50 people, 100 people, because every day he's making 100 phone calls. And by the time this whole news reaches everywhere, and the fellow can throw away the SIM and can get another SIM. So that's how things were happening. So we decided to use the blockchain, because blockchain is a distributed ledger. And what happens if I make a call and if I make a complaint, immediately that complaint is put on the blockchain. Once the complaint is put to the blockchain, every service provider is basically just pinging that blockchain to figure out as to whether there is any complaint related to my customer. So immediately he gets that information and immediately he takes action. So the time which was about 1 week earlier and which actually was sufficient to create a damage has now been reduced to zero. So immediately as I complain, immediately I can get a message saying that this person has been put on hold, investigation has been ordered, and immediately those things happen. So blockchain actually facilitates and quickens the process of inquiry. And again, this is a customer-centric move which we have done. The other move on the net neutrality, and people somehow don't understand what is net neutrality. It's a very funny kind of situation where people are passionate about net neutrality without understanding what is net neutrality. So let me simplify it for you. Basically, what net neutrality means is that the networks must be neutral to the content, which means that the networks must not decide as to which content will I prioritize, which content I will pass through, which content I will block, stuff like that. They are just a pipe. And what kind of water is flowing into that pipe is none of their business in that sense, so long as the water does not damage their pipes. So basically, and what flows in the pipes is basically data. So whether this data is a data related to X or related to Y, whether it is something bad, something good, that is network should not decide. So that is broadly the principle of net neutrality. Now, why do you think it is important? It is important because if I send a message to you, and if I have to take the permission of the network operator that this is a message I'm sending to Dr. Charu Malhotra, that should not happen. So long as I paid money for transferring my message, transferring my data package to anybody whom I want to transfer, it is basically good for them. The telecom service providers must charge the data wheeling charges, data transportation charges. That's about all. So this is the way. Now, why it is important is because if, let's say, I make a program, I am a startup, I make a program, and today, as you know, everything is flowing on the internet only. So I make an app. Now that app essentially is downloaded by so many people. Thereafter, the person calls. Now, if I have to take permission from a network operator that you allow free flow of my data or you prioritize my data, you can't. Basic idea is four things. Net neutrality, the networks must be neutral, which means networks must not either give a price preference, which means they can't say that I will transport your data at less cost. They should not basically look into the data. They should not really give a prioritization. Basically, they should not, say that I will give a fast lane to your data. They should also not block my data. They should not throttle my data, which means speed should not become less for my data. So therefore, which means that they should not discriminate any person from data flow. Now, this is important for a country like ours because internet is the one which is going to be used in all our innovations. And if internet is a permissionless platform, which means I can transport data to internet and store it, distribute it, do whatever. Now this platform, if it becomes the handmaiden of the gatekeepers, and obviously telecom service providers are the gatekeepers. They are the ones sitting on the edge of the internet. So therefore, gatekeepers must not have the power to cannibalize or to divide or to prioritize internet. So internet must remain a permissionless platform for innovation. And it's very important for a developing country like ours, where everything is going to be a leapfrogging from offline to a completely online systems. And therefore, we should basically keep this game away from the service providers. Service providers must be in the business of transporting data without any discrimination of the destination, of the source, of the type. That should be none of their concern. So that's what is in brief net neutrality. And I think it's important for us to understand that net neutrality is important for a country like ours.
I totally agree with you, sir. It is permissionless internet, which will act as a leveler, which is such a wonderful concept, sir. Sir, since you explained so well, can I request you to explain another concept to my audience, which is about quality of service, sir? I recall again, somewhere in your tenure, you had talked about foundation of using crowdsourced data to measure service quality. So how would we look into this concept of quality of service to be maintained in public service deliveries in the process of digital transformation of our country, sir?
What is actually happening is that we typically measure the quality of service from the provider's viewpoint. Everybody says, oh, let's take the telecommunication as an example. So telecommunication, the fellows will say, "Oh, I've got this speed is there." Everybody is advertising that I've got. You can download the film in 3 minutes and 5 minutes and stuff like that. But actually, I thought that the best way to measure the quality was the consumers themselves could measure the quality and contribute that data to the overall platform. So therefore, we created a platform where a person could, when he is measuring the speed, he can measure the speed and upload the data. So therefore, you get an overall view and overall map of the speed at various places in time, as measured by the consumers, not measured by the TRAI, by regulator or by the service provider. So essentially, that becomes a very good method. And today, crowdsourcing of data has become a very effective technique of actually data collection, data fine tuning, data correction, and finally arriving at a truth. So, look at it, Wikipedia. Wikipedia is a completely crowdsourced platform. The knowledge is being contributed by the users, shared by the users, so it becomes a very, very effective platform. And knowledge is also curated in the sense that, suppose I write some great things about myself. They will say, look, this person is an interested party. So therefore, he is not the correct person. And then if I write something wrong, maybe Charu Malhotra will go on the website saying that no, this is not correct. So she will also make some changes. So that way, by these kinds of deliberations, you come to a final truth. The quality of data improves by crowdsourcing. So that is something which we have employed on a number of things, and a lot of innovations can be built around crowdsourcing. People have been now more and more using data through crowdsourcing. In fact, we are ourselves in the Ayushman Bharat, for example, the hospital's location. That also we are asking people to crowdsource that. If you go to a hospital, just send a WhatsApp message giving the location of that hospital to us, and we will ensure that and that way we can say this data is verified. For example, if there are 4 or 5 customers or patients who basically send us that data, then we know that this hospital is its location is completely fixed, and it's a verified location. So this way you can actually improve the accuracy of the data. So I think crowdsourcing is going to be a very important innovation and very important thing for us in this today's world.
Sir, I totally agree. Citizen centricity seems to be the driving force of crowdsourcing data for public good, and which is the right approach. Sir, you mentioned about your book. I also recall, reading your book, Making of Aadhaar, World's Largest Identity Platform. Sir, that is something we would like to hear from you, how Aadhaar has contributed to India being globally hailed for this unique ID process, sir.
No, actually, Aadhaar was a moonshot. Moonshot, as in, at that point in time, the mandate to the Unique ID Authority of India to create unique identity for every individual or every resident of India was actually a moonshot. It had never been tried before at this scale. Nobody in the world had done it. Nobody had used biometric for the purpose of ensuring uniqueness at such a scale. And I think so there were a lot of imponderables, and the mandate was pretty stiff and saying that you create a unique identity. So I think that was the thing, and we started studying the problem, and then we kind of came to the conclusion that let's take fingerprints, and that also we realized that fingerprints also have a limited accuracy of 95%. So 5% inaccuracy will mean about 60 million people in this country, or 1.2 billion, having duplicate identity. Therefore, we went into another attribute called iris image. So iris plus fingerprint, 2 independent biometrics. They created an accuracy of a very high percentage. That we did our proof of concept. So I think it's a very unique project because the technology was used at this scale for the first time. Then we designed this as an identity without eligibility, just an identity. X is X, that's all. X is married, unmarried, rich, poor, has a house, does not have a house. That's not really relevant. So we said the basic attributes of identity are name, age, and gender. That's all. And of course, communication address is there because you send that letter We designed an identity which is completely online identity, no smart cards, nothing. You can download. There is nothing called original Aadhaar. There is nothing called non-original Aadhaar. You can download the number. So number is the very basic thing, and you can put the number in your mobile phone. So I think designing took a lot of time, lot of our time, and I think we were fortunate to have been led by none other than Mr. Nandan Rekari, who is a visionary, I must say, and who is a person who is a true leader in that sense. So he basically guided the whole project, and I think that's how it ended up. And this actually today has become this is a foundational identity. So this identity, digital, foundational, universal for the lifetime. So it doesn't change. It's invariant. It's a random number devoid of any intelligence. Just a number. So I think all the beautiful attributes are there, which make it a very robust, scalable, pluggable identity system. And therefore it is now being used in multiple domains like getting a PDS ration, to getting a mobile connection, to open a bank account, to getting a DBT. So all kinds of applications are happening today. So that's how deduplicating the databases for beneficiaries in the government schemes. So all those things are happening. That's the way it actually happened, and I have been lucky to be associated with this project.
Definitely, sir. If I could use that without exaggeration, you seem to be the Masiha of common person on the grassroots, sir, because all the initiatives which you've mentioned so far are actually trying to make the life of common man easier. Sir, I saw you watching your watch. So I would just like to round off with the final feather, sir, which we must discuss, CoWIN platform. Sir, CoWIN platform has become a leveler, I could say. Sir, we know you are behind its creation, its concept, its implementation, and now its enhancement, sir. This would be your final word for us, sir, about CoWIN platform. And please let us now know how it could become a universal platform also, sir. Over to you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Charu, for this question. I think it's again a very topical question. So one is that when the Honorable Prime Minister was going to launch the vaccination drive on 16th of January, I was actually asked by the Cabinet Secretary to come over and start taking the leadership of this digital platform, which called CoWIN, which was being built. So I joined sometime on 8th or 9th of January, I'm not sure, approximately around that time. And then, we looked at, and I met the Honorable Prime Minister also, and Honorable Prime Minister actually directed me that we should make it into a really scalable and a product, a wonderful world level product. So those were the words of the Honorable Prime Minister, which I remembered, I kept in mind. So we started building that platform. And again, some of the things which we remember, one is the platform must be citizen-centric. So that's one part. It should be easy. It should be inclusive. It should not actually create digital divide. So it should not be a platform for digital haves. So basically, it should be available on the mobile phones of every person. Then it should be inclusive, which means that every person may not have a mobile phone or a smartphone. So therefore, we should have 4 people on one mobile phone people can register. 4 is a number which we just randomly arrived. It could be 3, it could be 5 also. 4 is a reasonably good number. So that's one part. And secondly, it should be scalable because we are a billion plus people, and therefore the platform must sustain that kind of load. So that's another part. So it should be, and then finally it should be interoperable, which means that it should be able to talk to other systems outside. So we published the APIs. The APIs were not an afterthought. APIs were published in the beginning itself as to how the platform will connect to the other systems. And then it should be a platform, which means it should be usable by each stakeholder. So one of the most important stakeholders is the person who is going to be vaccinated, which is the people of India. And so therefore he or she should be able to look at the vacancies which are available, book the slots and dates, etc. And that's one part. Secondly, the hospitals which are actually doing the vaccination, they should be able to publish their vacancies, their timetables, how much capacity they have got. So that's another application which we should have. Then the vaccinator who does the vaccination should be able to verify the identity of the person, either from the previously uploaded identity papers or on the spot. And therefore that's another module. And finally, a person should be able to, download the certificate, because certificate of vaccination is also going to be an important artifact. Today, everybody is asking, are you vaccinated? Show me the certificate. So it should be, but it should be a digitally downloadable stuff. It should be like Aadhaar. It should not happen that it's a paper document. As and when you want, you can download it. As many times as you want, you can download it. And it's basically QR coded security, certificate. So I think it's verifiable, it's non-repudiable certificate, and it should have all the relevant details of vaccination as to what is the place, who vaccinated him, what is the date, whether it's a first vaccination or a second vaccination. Everything is there. So I think this is the basic architecture. In fact, somebody just tweeted saying that, oh, I got vaccination in America. Now, can you issue me a certificate? So I asked that person that America should have issued a certificate to him. I mean, you got both the vaccinations in America. America didn't issue a certificate. So he said, no, there are no certificates like that. So now you make a provision that, I am an Indian who got vaccinated in America. Now I come back to India. Now you issue me the certificate on the basis of the, whatever paper proof America had provided. So anyway, it's interesting kind of anecdote I remember. Basically, now that is the way we begin. And then, of course, on the way, some people said that let me allow my passport to be linked to the certificate. Somebody said let me allow my corrections. Somebody said that I've used 2 different mobile phones and therefore I've got 2 first dose certificates. Please allow me to merge these certificates. There are multiple things. People kept on having these problems and we kept on solving these problems. So today the platform has got about, as you said, 15 million or 16 million, people. There's no platform in the world which has grown up in a couple of months to that level. It has sustained 141 million, 14.1 million vaccinations in a day, about 7-8 days back. 3 times we have had more than 1 crore vaccinations per day. So the platform is absolutely scalable. I think nobody is complaining that the platform is freezing or it's not working. It just comes, OTP comes within 10 seconds. Everything is working absolutely flawlessly. Some, media people try to say that, there are glitches in the platform. There have never been any glitches in the platform. So that's something which I wanted to clarify. Again, I'm very lucky to have been provided this opportunity to work on this platform by the Honorable Prime Minister. And I'm really grateful to him for all the opportunities which he has given me. And fortunately, it has worked very well. Now, of course, we had the Global COVID Conclave on 5th of July, and 147 countries participated. Almost every country in the world participated. Many ministers participated, and now our Prime Minister wanted this to become a global open source. So basically, we have open sourced the thing. We have created documentation. We have created films. We have created capacity building. We have trained people. We have given them training certificates. So now I think the entire ecosystem is ready. And now the Ministry of External Affairs is talking to the countries, entering into MOUs with them, and then finally working with them to replicate the system in their countries or to modify and customize. Those people who have been trained by us will be able to do so. So I think the platform has gone global. So it's again a moment of pride for all of us in India that we built a platform which has gone global. Finally, what has also happened is that we are now repurposing this platform to become a platform for universal immunization program. Because now if we are able to track every child when he has got vaccinated, then if we are able to send SMSs or messages to the child's guardian saying that your now second polio dose has become due, please get the dose. So that will become a reminder, and once till he gets the dose, we'll continue to remind him. And finally, when he gets the dose, that also gets recorded. So every single dose gets recorded. Every child is tracked. His vaccination status is checked. Universal vaccination status. So I think that's something very easy to do, and we are making those changes in the platform and creating an instance which will be used for universal immunization.
People of India, sir, has been your focus, and that's helped you to translate your dream to plans to implementation. We are indeed very grateful to have a digital leader like you with us. On behalf of Director General IFPA, Shri S.N. Tripathi, I profusely thank you, sir, for taking up the opportunity to share with us your innermost ramblings right from your journey as a an aspiring officer to the digital leader of the country. Second, sharing with us basics very well and very lucidly, sir. Thanks a lot. We'll be in touch again, sir. Thanks
Thank
for
you
being
very much for having me on this podcast, and it's always my pleasure and privilege to be associated with IITA. Thank you very much, Arun.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot.